What, you buy that uniform online? A black man in an $80,000 zero-cents SUV wearing military gear? You don't belong here. You make this neighborhood look dirty, he screamed at Marcus Jackson. A man just driving home. Then he smashed the window, yanked the door open, got in his face, and pulled the trigger. But what he didn't know, the man he just humiliated was a U.S. Army lieutenant colonel, a decorated soldier who bled for this country. What state do you live in? Where you are, does skin color decide if you're honored or hunted? He turned off the engine, pulled out his military ID, and placed it neatly on his left thigh, the spot where he always kept his documents during security checks. With his right hand, he rolled down the window. The late afternoon sunlight slanted across his shoulder, casting a warm glow on the faded green fabric of his uniform, worn thin from years of training. He didn't speak, didn't breathe heavily, and didn't look back. At 45, Marcus understood that standing tall and wearing a badge wasn't always enough to make people believe you were innocent. Every movement he made now felt drawn from hundreds of drills. Don't pull the ID too fast. Don't reach under the seat. Don't rummage through pockets. Any of it could be taken as a threat, even something as harmless as retrieving a wallet. Marcus didn't want to be misunderstood. Even more so, he didn't want his daughter, just a few houses away, to see her father on the pavement. Just because of one wrong move, the SUV behind him idled with a low hum. A soft breeze passed through the window, carrying the scent of oak from a nearby yard. He felt dampness on his back, unsure whether it was sweat or a premonition. His wristwatch blinked with a notification. The base had confirmed his evening report. Doesn't matter anymore, he thought, eyes fixed ahead, hands resting firmly on the wheel. This was the safe position, what the military called a posture of total defense. No aggression, no resistance, only honor as a shield. Marcus glanced at the mirror once more. The police car door hadn't opened. Scratchy static came from the patrol radio, unclear voices. He didn't know who was behind the wheel, didn't know if they were young or old, battle-tested or fresh out of the academy. But he did know one thing: some carry guns not to protect, and some who wear uniforms must learn how to survive on the very soil they swore to defend. He adjusted a button on his shirt, sat a little straighter, hand resting lightly on the ID. This wasn't habit anymore. It was a message without words. I served. I'm not a threat. I'm doing the right thing. But Marcus also knew, in a system trained to judge by skin color before credentials, military IDs, medals, and achievements could mean absolutely nothing. And so he sat there, in the warm golden hour of a peaceful neighborhood where people brought pies on weekends, where doors were always adorned with flags and Christmas wreaths. A man in uniform, with his ID on his lap, waiting to see if honor was still enough to keep him alive in a 10-square-meter gap between two vehicles. The police car door flung open with jarring force. Jack Hurley stepped out, his boots hitting the pavement with a dry thud. He didn't run, he didn't need to. He believed he was the law. A white man in his mid-40s, bulky, balding, face flushed like he'd just come out of an argument. He didn't check registration, didn't ask any questions. Just one look, hostile, suspicious, already searching for something wrong in anyone who didn't look like him. "Get out of the car! Hands on your head!" Hurley shouted, pulling his gun like he had trained for this moment. Marcus didn't flinch. He knew any movement could be seen as non-compliance. His left hand remained on the military ID. He raised his head and spoke calmly. "I am Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Jackson, United States Army. I'm on my way home. This is my Shut the hell up! I don't care who you are. Get out now!" Hurley interrupted, his Glock aimed directly at Marcus's forehead. The distance between them was less than 10 feet. Hurley's breath steamed in the air alongside the hum of the still-running SUV. Marcus held his gaze. Across the street, an old woman peeked through her curtains, phone to her ear. A boy no older than 8 stood frozen, clutching a golden retriever, eyes wide as he stared at the soldier being held at gunpoint. Marcus drew a deep breath, trying to keep his voice even. "You're making an unnecessary scene. I haven't done anything wrong." "Nothing wrong? You probably bought that uniform online. You're black, in an $80,000 SUV, wearing a uniform? Who the hell do you think you are, showing up in a rich neighborhood?" Hurley growled, letting out a short, mocking laugh. No one laughed. Nothing about it was funny. Marcus didn't move. Every nerve in his body was drawn taut, but his face showed no change. He understood. It wasn't the weapon that made this dangerous, it was the man holding it. Convinced he was always right, the street fell silent. A single yellow leaf drifted across the road. Then, click. A sound so faint only someone waiting for it would notice. Hurley had flipped the safety. The chamber was now live. Marcus's hand still lay on the ID. His eyes never left the barrel. "I am unarmed. I told you I'm military. And you'll drop like a resisting suspect if I see you move." Hurley's voice turned to a hiss, finger tightening on the trigger. This was no longer a procedural check. This was a performance of power, and perhaps a personal vendetta Marcus didn't yet understand, at least not yet. There was no warning, no countdown, just a cold trigger pull, like a reflex trained the wrong way. The gunshot rang out, sharp and dry, like a sudden slap across the face of a peaceful afternoon. That sound echoed through the street, tearing the air apart, splitting the boundary between normal and never the same again. The bullet grazed Marcus's left shoulder, slicing through the olive military uniform, leaving a vivid streak of red quickly spreading down his sleeve. His reflex was a slight flinch, but he didn't fall, didn't scream, didn't fight back. He stayed still, as if pain was no stranger, as if the gunshot was just an echo from some battlefield still lingering. He clenched his teeth through the pain, his eyes steady, the same look that had helped him survive Fallujah and Kandahar. Hurley stepped back half a pace. He seemed unsure of what he had just done, not because of remorse, but because what he had shot didn't react like a typical black suspect. He expected flailing, a curse, a charge, but all he got was a calm, stern gaze and a small drop of blood soaking through the fabric. The silence became the loudest noise. A phone was raised from a second-floor window, then a second from across the street. The elderly woman from earlier had now stepped out onto her porch, her hands trembling but her camera steady. A young man on a bike removed his headphones, opened a video app. No one intervened. No one screamed. No one rushed in to help or stop it. They just held up their phones as if by recording they could say, "I did my part." Marcus slowly raised his right hand, not to resist, not out of fear, but to balance himself. He knew the wound wasn't fatal, but he also knew what was dying here wasn't his body. It was trust in the uniform, in the military ID, in the right not to be shot when you've done nothing wrong. The evening breeze swept across the street. The scene seemed frozen. A wounded soldier, a trembling officer holding a gun, and dozens of lenses aimed at them like a stage. But Marcus wasn't performing. He simply existed, as living evidence of what America doesn't want to admit but can't escape, the truth about skin color and the recklessness of power. Hurley still stood there, Glock in hand, eyes darting between Marcus and the cameras. For the first time, he realized the consequences, but it was too late. "Please, call an ambulance," Marcus said, voice raspy, blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. He wasn't begging, he was commanding like a commander still on duty, but no one replied. No sound answered, except the cicadas and the slowing heartbeat in his left ear. Hurley remained frozen, gun still raised, hand now trembling, not from regret, from fear. Something inside him had cracked. Not his morals, but his illusion of control. He no longer controlled the scene. He didn't control Marcus's eyes, the eyes of a man who had seen death from closer range than that gun. And most of all, he didn't control the cameras now recording from every direction, second floor, sidewalk, behind curtains, even from the dash cam of the patrol car next to him. People began murmuring. An older white man in a polo shirt said, loud enough for the camera to catch, "I knew it, he looked suspicious." But a younger woman, holding a baby, sighed sorrowfully. "Dear God, he really is military." A college student whispered to a friend, "I got it all. He didn't do anything." Others remained silent, but their eyes and their cameras stayed fixed on Marcus, whose hand still rested on his now blood-stained military ID. 28 seconds after the shot, a familiar sound echoed from down the street. Sirens. A second patrol car rolled in slowly as if it, too, was cautious. A young officer stepped out, no older than 30, with neat brown hair and a name tag. Thompson. He didn't draw his weapon. Instead, he stared at Marcus, stunned. "Lieutenant Colonel." Marcus looked up at the young officer, said nothing, needed to say nothing. In that glance was a connection not between the hooter and witness, but between two men who had worn the uniform, who had once stood on the same side. Thompson gasped, almost blurting out, "What the hell is going on?" Then grabbed his radio, speaking fast. "We need an ambulance." The officer discharged the weapon. "The victim is a senior military officer, shoulder wound. Conscious." Hurley stepped back, quietly holstered his gun, as if a technical gesture could erase what had just happened. But the cameras didn't forget. The elderly woman on the porch had recorded everything and looked up. "I've been live streaming since minute 17, young man. Want a copy?" 3 hours later, the clip hit Twitter. An anonymous user posted it with the hashtag #ShotTheColonel. It was retweeted 14,000 times within the hour. Reddit exploded with threads. "He didn't do anything. Cops shoot a soldier who's protecting who," and then it hit the front page of the local newspaper. "Police shoot Army Lieutenant Colonel in Arlington. Victim was unarmed." From that moment on, the story was no longer in Hurley's hands, and Marcus, though lying on a stretcher, shoulder bleeding, heartbeat fading, was no longer just a victim. He had become a symbol, not because he was shot, but because he survived long enough to be seen. At 8:00 p.m. Eastern Time, CNN opened its broadcast with an image no one expected to see on national television. A black man dressed in a U.S. Army uniform with the rank of lieutenant colonel, blood soaking his shoulder, holding up his military ID card, seated in an SUV pulled over on the roadside. A red headline scrawled across the bottom, "Breaking, U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel shot by police in Virginia, unarmed." Anderson Cooper stared directly into the camera, his tone steady but razor sharp. "What is happening in our law enforcement system when a lieutenant colonel, a recipient of the Medal of Valor, is treated like a threat?" At that same moment, the original verified video was exploding across social media, dominating TikTok, Instagram Reels, and Facebook groups. Major news outlets, CNN, MSNBC, CBS, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, all ran the story simultaneously. Even Military Times, typically focused solely on defense news, launched a dedicated section titled "Jackson Incident: Tactical Failure or Systemic Rot?" In their special coverage, every frame was broken down by the second, from the moment Officer Hurley stepped out of the patrol car to the instant he pulled the trigger, all within 2 seconds. There were no signs of aggression from Marcus, no sudden movement, no threat. Audio extracted from the video captured Marcus's voice, calm and clear. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Jackson, United States Army. I'm on my way home." Nothing followed except the display of his military ID card through the window. No wallet reached for, no keys turned, no hand raised, no shouting. Just the disciplined stillness a soldier is trained to hold when under threat. A longtime commentator and former Pentagon advisor appeared on CNN, his gaze piercing. If this had been a white lieutenant colonel in uniform, sitting in an SUV in an upscale neighborhood, he would have been greeted, offered a handshake, maybe even invited in for a drink. But he wasn't white, and in America, that's still enough to have a gun pointed at you. Within 10 minutes, social media ignited. Clips from the CNN broadcast were reposted with the hashtag Justice for Jackson. Veterans groups, military rights organizations, and even citizens, usually detached from defense issues, joined the conversation. That night, America didn't just share a news story. It shared a moment of reckoning. How could someone who swore to die for his country become its target? At the same time, the comment sections under the viral video about Marcus Jackson were erupting. Thousands, then tens of thousands of comments flooded Reddit, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Half of the country was outraged, devastated, and in disbelief. How is this still happening in 2025? He's a soldier. You just shot at the nation's honor. My brother served in Iraq. I can't let him see this. The flood of emotion brought with it heart-wrenching posts from military families, veterans, and even those who had once stood on opposite sides of America's political divide. For the first time, many spoke of a quiet, nameless fear being shot by someone wearing a different uniform. But the other half responded with suspicion, paranoia, and defensiveness. Don't trust edited footage. We don't know what he had in the vehicle. Soldiers can be criminals, too. Don't be fooled by the uniform. On far-right media, hosts didn't ask questions, they sowed division. Why are we glorifying a defiant man just because he wore a uniform? One even wrote, if he wasn't black, if he wasn't driving an SUV, this wouldn't have happened. The hashtag Shot the Colonel became a battlefield. Within 6 hours, more than 100,000 posts, shares, reaction videos, and heated arguments had emerged. The two sides clashed not just with opinions, but with history, with bias, with emotion, with fear. From congressional hallways to local coffee shops, from military forums to college classrooms, nearly every conversation returned to one paralyzing question. If the military, something we believe to be sacred, disciplined, and committed to national service, can't be protected by the system, then who can? Meanwhile, Marcus lay in a military hospital in Bethesda, his shoulder wrapped in white gauze, a steady IV drip beside him. In the quiet room, only the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor could be heard. The TV in his room was playing the news, his news, footage of him holding up his military ID through the car window, blood staining his left shoulder, his eyes showing no fear, no anger, just a soldier holding his ground. Marcus picked up the remote and muted the volume. He didn't need to hear it. He'd been hearing versions of this his entire life. Why people like him needed to be more careful, more compliant, more invisible if they wanted to survive. But this time, Marcus knew, the world couldn't pretend it didn't happen, because this time everyone had seen it, and when a truth is seen long enough, it can no longer be denied. Bethesda Military Hospital was nothing like a civilian hospital. It was quieter, more cautious. There were no crying children, no noisy relatives pacing the halls, no soft waiting room music from ceiling speakers. The nurses here moved like soldiers on a mission, light footsteps, upright backs. No small talk outside of orders. Every gesture was precise, like a drill maneuver. Marcus was transferred to a private room that same night after his identity was verified by two agencies, the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs. No one asked him what he wanted to eat. No one asked if he was okay. To this place, a lieutenant colonel getting shot was a matter to be handled by protocol, not by emotion. At 2:47 a.m., he woke up for the third time since the dressing procedure. His left shoulder throbbed with a dull pain. His heart rate was still slow, but steady. In a room containing nothing but a bed, a built-in nightlight, and a vital signs monitor, he felt the isolation acutely. No conversation, no warmth. A military medic appeared just before 3 a.m., wearing no name tag, silently unhooked his IV, and nodded in farewell. The medic's eyes didn't inspect the wound. They locked straight into Marcus's gaze, as if under strict instruction, do not comfort. Do not reveal anything. The TV was off, not a sound in the room, but the phone on his bedside table lit up. 134 missed calls, 87 unread messages from his wife, from old friends, from fellow officers at Ramstein Base, from a soldier he once saved in a Mosul trench in 2014, even from a Filipino sergeant who once said, "If you hadn't pulled me from that fire, I'd have had nothing to come home to." A slow-appearing push notification from the defense correspondent wire blinked on his lock screen. Pentagon silent on Lieutenant Colonel shooting what's being buried. Marcus stared at the ceiling, motionless. He knew the pain in his shoulder would heal, skin would mend, tendons would reconnect, and muscles would regain strength. But there were wounds that didn't heal in the body. They lived in the system, lived in the eyes that looked away when the gun went off, in handshakes no longer firm enough to call comradeship, in promises of internal handling that vanished into silence. He had seen it before, at base camps, at command posts, even on battlefields, but never had it entered his flesh so literally. And now, It was waiting for him to fully awaken, to remind him that some battles are more dangerous than being shot. At 8 a.m. the next morning, a soft knock sounded, 3 times. Not rushed, not urgent, but enough to wake Marcus with a sense of unease. The door creaked open. A man entered, not in uniform, no name tag, no sign of identity, but a calm, almost chilling stillness. But Marcus needed only one look. The man's eyes alone told him this was CID, Criminal Investigation Division. The man was tall, lean, and gray-haired. No smile, no small talk. He sat in the chair beside the bed, laid a paper envelope on the table, and spoke in a flat, steady tone. "We don't have much time." Before Marcus could ask, he saw the familiar heading on the envelope, a copy of the report he'd filed less than 2 weeks ago. His hand trembled as he picked it up, not from pain, but because the one thing no one had dared confirm was now placed directly before him. "This copy, where did it go?" he asked, voice hoarse. The man's face didn't change. Nowhere. It was blocked at the command tier before it could reach Homeland Security. No intake number, no signature. Marcus sat upright. The pain in his shoulder dulled beneath the rush of adrenaline. "You're sure?" he pressed. The man nodded. "I wouldn't be here if I weren't, and if I hadn't been kicked out of my unit just last week." He paused. "I was in the internal review pipeline. 1 week after your submission, I noticed there was no tracking code. When I asked, my file was frozen. 3 days later, I was reassigned to Alaska. Temporary duty. I got the message." Marcus looked at the folder. 6 pages, but every word weighed like stone. Inside were the names of officers he had once worked with, who had remained silent when wrongs occurred. There were photos, charts showing that black service members were subjected to internal security checks at 3 times the rate of their white counterparts, with identical infraction rates. He had never expected the report to go public easily, but he hadn't expected it to be buried this cleanly. No trace, no noise, no witnesses. The man stood up. Just before leaving, he spoke softly. "My advice, if you're still planning to bring this to light, do it now. The system is shifting, but some doors will close forever. And next time, they won't aim for your shoulder." Marcus didn't answer, just gave a slight nod. The door shut with a quietness that made it feel like it had never opened, but Marcus knew it had just let in something immense. In the armored silence of the military hospital corridor, he sensed a storm was coming, and this time he was no longer behind the lines. 4 days after the shooting, in a nearly overlooked news segment on local station WTVN, a phone call from a man claiming to be a former Army sergeant completely shifted the perspective on the incident. The caller, Clayton Reese, who served at Fort Irwin in 2010, stated clearly over the line, "I trained with both of them, Marcus Jackson and Jack Hurley. They're not strangers to each other." At first, the claim seemed baseless, but within hours, Military Times verified the Fort Irwin training records. Every detail matched. Hurley had applied for the Special Operations Unit led by Marcus and was rejected for undisclosed internal reasons. The records confirmed that Hurley had participated in the selection program for a special unit where Marcus was the lead evaluator. Documents noted that Hurley failed the final psychological assessment. Clayton Reese, the witness, added, "I was there when the evaluation sheet was printed. Hurley's name was crossed out with a short note, unfit, unstable behavior under high-pressure environments, but he didn't take it well. He slammed a desk and shouted, 'I was cut because that damn officer is black.'" When asked further, Reese didn't hesitate. Hurley didn't hate Marcus for being an officer. He hated that Marcus was a man of color and still a commander. To some people, Marcus's very existence is an insult. It disrupts the unspoken order that many are used to. That giving orders isn't for someone who looks like him. In the military, Reese explained, some learn to endure, some to obey, and some, like Hurley, harbor deep resentment when not placed above those they see as beneath them. That same night, Military Times published a special report titled, "The Trigger Man and the Target, Not Their First Encounter." The article dissected every detail. The training year, the selection panel, the reason Hurley was cut, everything matched. Most importantly, Marcus himself had never mentioned the connection, perhaps thinking it no longer mattered, or never imagining it would resurface this violently. But life doesn't obey forgetfulness. It has its own memory. By the next morning, the report had spread across multiple platforms. People began asking if Marcus had once rejected Hurley. Was the shooting truly an unfortunate incident, or a personal vendetta disguised in uniform? A sociology expert commented on air, "The danger here isn't just individual behavior. It's a system that lets someone carry personal grudges into law enforcement and gives them the legal right to pull a trigger." During a closed-door briefing at the Pentagon, a veteran Military Times reporter stood up and asked bluntly, "Did Marcus Jackson reject Jack Hurley from the Special Ops selection at Fort Irwin in 2010? The military spokesperson, a silver-haired colonel, paused a moment, then answered briefly, "We do not discuss the personal history of our service members." The statement was short, neither confirming nor denying, but in military circles, silence is the loudest confirmation. As media attention intensified, an anonymous Reddit account, claiming to be a fellow trainee of Hurley, posted a long message. "I remember the day he found out he was cut. He punched a dorm wall, cracked the drywall. He screamed, 'Who does that black bastard think he is to evaluate me?' That story had once been a barracks tale, an iconic meltdown logged in reports, then forgotten." The soldier wrote that after the incident, Hurley vanished from the base, and months later reappeared, this time in civilian uniform, as a state police officer. This is no longer a case of mistaken identity or procedural mishap. It's a reunion between two men once on opposite ends of an evaluation form. One passed through training with discipline, grit, and merit and became a lieutenant colonel. The other failed under pressure, left the army but carried his grudge, only to don a different uniform, with a different kind of power. The power to stop cars, to draw a weapon, to decide who lives and who dies. A CNN analyst, an expert on internal conflict, remarked, "If all this is true, the shooting isn't just misconduct, it's a personal act of revenge, masked as official duty. And if the system allows that, then it's no longer an individual failure." The words struck like a hammer against a wall already cracking. Marcus's identity, Hurley's past, buried reports, all now weaving into a map of conflict that had always existed, just waiting for detonation. And when Hurley pulled the trigger that day, maybe he thought silence would save him, like it had before. That no one would remember, no one would trace it back, no one would care who he was before the badge. But this time, the man he shot didn't die, and that man didn't stay silent. This time, memory returned, not as a nightmare, but as a declaration of war against the fake memories the system had built to protect men like Hurley. Marcus's black SUV remained in the Arlington Police Department's secure impound lot, an area designated for evidence tied to sensitive cases. 6 days after the shooting, at the request of Marcus's legal counsel, an inventory report was filed, listing all items retrieved from the scene. Among them, a leather wallet, a cracked iPhone, a military uniform stained with blood on the left shoulder and front flap, but no silver USB drive, the item Marcus always kept in the glove compartment. The only person besides Marcus who knew about the USB's existence was Major Delilah Trent, an internal policy advisor at the Department of Defense. A week before the shooting, she had sent Marcus a brief, encrypted email with just one line: "Unit-level classified files. Don't email. Bring it directly to the office. I'll decrypt on site." Marcus had printed the message, folded it 4 times, and tucked it into his chest pocket, where it would later be bloodstained. The USB itself was wrapped carefully in a blue velvet pouch, placed in the glove compartment, where he always stored confidential items not permitted to be digitally encrypted. "You're sure you left it in the car?" asked his lawyer, a woman named Valerie Min, as they retraced every movement. Marcus replied without hesitation. "Glove compartment, blue pouch, never left the car." Yet, in the initial evidence report, there was no mention of such an item, neither described nor generically labeled. A police officer in charge of the vehicle's sealing merely said vaguely, only saw a wallet and ID papers. More troubling was the finding from a joint inspection by independent investigators from the Department of Justice and Department of Defense. All security camera footage around Bay Number 4, where Marcus's SUV was stored, had experienced a signal loss for a 2-hour window following the vehicle's impoundment. The internal report dubbed it a sudden system error during server maintenance, but the timing was suspiciously perfect. It coincided with a period of zero oversight, and just when tampering with evidence would be least detectable. When asked, Delilah did not hide her frustration. That USB held 3 years of internal audits. It included full racial analysis data on rapid response deployments, psychological assessments of every tactical unit officer, and, most importantly, a list of units flagged for reform but never disciplined. It's not just evidence, it's a diagnosis of a systemic disease. At this point, the question was no longer who pulled the trigger, but who knew Marcus was carrying that USB and acted before it could be submitted, and, more deeply, who in the system had the authority to erase all traces of something that was never meant to exist in the hands of a black officer. Delilah Trent, called to testify before the Senate Military Oversight Subcommittee, wasted no time commanding the room. When asked about the significance of the USB Marcus had in his car the day of the shooting, she said one sentence, slow but crystal clear: if that USB gets out, it doesn't just burn one agency, it incinerates the entire structure of civil-military coordination. No one in the room challenged her. No follow-up questions were asked, because everyone knew she wasn't exaggerating. The contents weren't just dry charts or stats. They included confidential meeting transcripts, unresolved whistleblower complaints, emails about ignored incidents, and, most damning, a list of officers internally disciplined for discriminatory conduct but later promoted. One name stunned the entire committee: Lieutenant Jack Hurley, previously endorsed by a member of the Interagency Security Task Force itself. Now the question shifted again. Not who pulled the trigger, but who knew Marcus had the proof and silenced him before he could deliver it. A former military document technician, once part of the encryption unit, anonymously contacted Military Times. In his letter, he wrote, "I saw the file. Marcus was scheduled to present it to internal investigations that Thursday. The shooting happened 3 days prior. The location of the stop, the timing, the missing USB, none of this was a coincidence." Media analysts began connecting the dots. Marcus had been entrusted with top-secret data. He didn't email it, didn't upload to a server, he carried it by hand. His appointment wasn't public. Outsiders couldn't have known unless someone on the inside was tracking him. And if someone knew, then that traffic stop was no accident. It was an order, executed by a gun, by the system's silence, and by a meticulous erasure of every trace before anyone could recover what was lost. The story of Marcus was no longer just a personal tragedy. It had become a red thread unraveling across multiple layers of power, where evidence wasn't just paperwork, it was a threat to the very system, a system that existed on the assumption that wrongdoings would never be exposed. While the media argued over who was right or wrong, who deserved sympathy or blame, the USB and the truth were somewhere out there, either destroyed or hidden by someone who knew exactly what it contained and understood its power to bring the entire structure down. 3 days after Delilah Trent testified before the Military Oversight Subcommittee, an unusual object appeared in the hospital room where Marcus was staying. It hadn't passed the reception desk, hadn't been signed in, and wasn't visible on the hallway security cameras, if those cameras were even still operational. The morning shift nurse walked in and saw it neatly placed on the bedside table, a gray paper bag, unbranded, no sender information, unsealed. "It was there when I walked in," she said, voice calm, but her eyes wary. Inside the paper bag was a stainless steel thermos, the kind issued to new recruits at training camps, not for convenience but for uniformity. A worn label clung to the lid, its edge peeling off, Bravo 17 Corps, 2019. Marcus recognized the name instantly. It was the unit he had served in 4 years earlier. where he was in charge of psychological evaluation and internal oversight. He twisted open the lid. Inside was a small Ziploc bag, carefully moisture-proofed. Marcus pulled it out, a matte black USB drive, unbranded, unmarked, generic in appearance. But he knew that the most important things often looked the most ordinary. He plugged it into his personal laptop, which had no internet connection. A single folder appeared, titled Secure Copy, title Secure Copy, Archive Ver5. Marcus froze for a moment. The naming format wasn't unfamiliar. It was the same system he had implemented for internal encryption protocols at Bravo 17, where every archive was versioned on a quarterly cycle. The Ver5 label marked it as the final version from Q2 of that year, a version that, by regulation, should have been deleted after 90 days unless it received certified backup clearance. Very few would still have it. No one was allowed to. He opened the folder. Inside were files, data logs, reports, meeting minutes, and audio recordings from internal briefings, all consistent with what had once been stored on the silver USB that had gone missing from his car. Marcus clenched his fist, not out of anger or shock, but from something else entirely, a wordless gratitude. Someone had remembered. Someone had disobeyed the delete order. Someone who once listened to him lecture about the value of transparency, about how a system only works if no one fears the truth, and now that person was answering, not with words, but with action, in silence. That USB wasn't flashy. It didn't come from any official headquarters. It had no security certifications, but it contained what the entire system now lacked. A memory that had not been erased. And in a world where memory is often rewritten with a deletion command, holding on becomes an act of defiance. That same day, after receiving the mysterious USB hidden inside the thermos, Marcus opened his personal email inbox for the first time since being hospitalized. There was nothing notable until an email appeared at the top of the list, with no subject line, no sender name. The sender's address was temporarily encrypted, untraceable through any standard civilian system. The body of the message contained only a few lines, but the first one made him stop reading. I'm the soldier you kept on base in 2019. No name, no signature, no identifying details. But that single sentence pulled Marcus's memory back to the dusty mornings of Bravo 17, a thin, quiet Asian-American recruit who always sat in the back row during roll call. He had once been nicknamed Green Enemy and ostracized by his peers for being not American enough. When Marcus discovered the internal report had been deliberately ignored, he called for a special hearing and recommended reassignment for the recruit's direct superior, a sergeant with a known history of bias. The recruit stayed. No one talked about it again, until now. It had returned in the purest form of gratitude. Marcus kept reading. I don't know if what happened to you recently is connected to what you were working on, but I do know this. If you hadn't stepped in back then, I probably would have left the military in disgrace. The copy you saved, I kept it too, because I want to remember that not everyone bows to the system. I can't show myself, but I won't let you fight alone. That last line kept Marcus sitting in silence for hours. He read it again and again, as if each word carried a weight that anchored him in a world coming loose from all order. I can't show myself, but I won't let you fight alone. In a world where loyalty is usually defined by uniforms, ranks, command chains, and regulations, this young soldier had preserved something rare, a loyalty that required no name, no title, no recognition, only a sense of right. Marcus didn't reply to the email, not because he didn't want to, but because he knew that silence, in this case, was the final layer of protection for someone who had taken a risk. Even the simplest response could expose the soldier's identity, and if anyone was patient enough to monitor, they wouldn't miss the chance to trace the connection. He turned off the computer screen. What filled him wasn't the isolation he had felt in the hospital, but a different kind of quiet. The calm of someone who knew he was no longer alone. Somewhere out there, someone with no rank, no authority, no voice, was carrying a copy of the truth. And as the system tried to blur what Marcus had seen, it was the people no one noticed, like that young soldier, who were holding on to the memory he was never supposed to keep. The backup USB didn't just store data, it opened a gateway. Inside a subfolder named suppressed_complaints_AZ, Marcus found 27 reports previously submitted to internal review boards between 2017 and 2022. Each file was a fragment of memory, not only of the system but of himself. Some reports remained in raw draft format, never entered into any official processing system. Most lacked case numbers. No intake forms, no read confirmations. In other words, they had never existed in the eyes of the institution. The names weren't strangers. A training officer who once shook his hand at an assignment ceremony, a joint commander he supported during a chaotic raid in Chicago, someone who had gone live on CNN to speak about the moral responsibility of rapid response units, now listed among those accused of racial bias, excessive force, and falsifying coordination reports. Some files even included excerpts from emails and internal recordings, proof that the complaints were real, but were forced to be resolved internally to avoid setting a precedent. Marcus opened another folder, internal_escalation_2020. Inside was a data sheet he had compiled, cross-referencing 3 years of investigations between military police and state-level civilian departments. Over 15 clearly substantiated complaints had never been acted upon. No firings, no investigations. They were transferred, some into civilian forces, others were placed on medical leave, only to return in higher positions. Many of them now sat on interagency oversight boards, where they held veto power and shaped complaint response procedures. One internal email marked confidential appeared last on the reading list, sent from h.keller@govline.mil with the subject line, Re-Case G76 Internal. A single highlighted excerpt read, "Keep them in blues, loyalty secured." Marcus read the line over and over like a lightning strike to the spine. Blues here wasn't just the uniform, it was a code, a label, a mechanism to identify those in the system, those retained for their loyalty, not their integrity. The Brotherhood of the Blue, a name long whispered in military police and rapid response circles, now had proof. No longer was it a rumor among young officers in base camps. No longer an unofficial warning when transferring to new monitoring zones. It was real. There were rosters, coordination, orders to retain, and most importantly, approval from the highest tiers and personnel control chains. Marcus leaned back from the desk, staring at the laptop screen. On it was a list of people the public believed to be upholding order. But on his list, they were the ones monitoring each other, shielding one another, functioning as a reflexive defense system of the very institution. These people weren't exposed, they weren't punished, they weren't on the news because they were the ones who set the ethical standards that the media had to cite. Marcus had once heard about the Blue Brotherhood from a rookie dismissed from the Rapid Response Unit for a vague reason, not a cultural fit. Back then, he assumed it was just a euphemism, bureaucratic language to justify silent exclusion. But now, staring at the USB's contents, he understood. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't some shadowy cult, not a secret society from a movie. It was a real network, operating on a system of chair rotation, resource control, and power circulation among those alike. Same skin color, same thinking, same mutual cover-ups. The data mapping in the folder blueline_network7z painted a chillingly detailed picture. The list didn't just include names. It contained former assignments, internal email addresses, and brief psychological summaries. Almost every member had one thing in common: previously investigated, previously accused by subordinates or outside entities, but still retained their rank or were reassigned to units with environments more compatible with group values. Marcus knew that language well. It was code for go elsewhere to continue, but safer. A 2020 audio clip pulled from a leadership induction meeting echoed in crystal clarity. Stick to the Brotherhood model and everything goes smoothly. You hit trouble, someone will pull you out. Phrases like that weren't in manuals. but they existed because people believed in them. In another internal memo, a note at the bottom read, Boone, Jackson, Cantu, 3 names to avoid to keep your seat. Marcus froze when he saw his name. They had known. They had a list. His surveillance, the traffic stop, the shooting. It wasn't an accident. It was a programmed outcome. Marcus reopened Hurley's file. His civilian recruitment dossier should have been suspended. His psych evaluation was below threshold, but he got in. More than that, Hurley was fast-tracked for promotion just 3 months after leaving the military. In Marcus's report, the final approving officer was someone flagged in the recommended rotation column of _network. It all matched. They were a network, and Marcus was someone they had already marked. He gripped the USB tightly, whispering through clenched teeth like talking to himself. They're still wearing the uniform. They didn't need aliases, didn't need masks. They operated in the open because they believed no one would dare expose them. They had faith in the cleanup machine, in the complicit media, in the performative hearings. But this time, Marcus had the backup, the emails, the recordings, and the name, _network, 7Z, the compressed file that contained the full map of a system too accustomed to existing without being named. At noon on Monday, as most newsrooms aired their midday broadcasts, a single-line statement from the U.S. Department of Defense cut through the noise. An emergency hearing has been called by the Secretary of Defense regarding allegations submitted by Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Jackson. Within 10 minutes, major networks interrupted regular programming to broadcast the Pentagon statement live. The spokesperson did not mention Hurley, did not reference the shooting. They emphasized only one phrase: Cross-Agency Internal Protection Network. On social platforms, hashtags _network and Marcus Jackson hearing climbed into the top 5 national trends within an hour. A leak from the Military Times confirmed. Contents of the 7Z archive file are under review by the Department of Defense's Data Forensics Unit and Joint Civilian Investigators. The statement also noted that the entire hearing process would proceed under the protection of the highest-level intelligence investigation authority, referring to the Interagency Intelligence Investigation Division, a unit usually reserved for cases involving national-level leaks. At major military installations, urgent summons were sent to dozens of personnel named in the previously blocked reports. People who once thought they'd escaped scrutiny were now required to testify under oath. Former commanders and personnel officers who had approved position transfers were placed under verification. Many of them contacted the Secretary's office directly, requesting to explain internally before the hearing. The automated response was short. All evaluations will be based on records and digital evidence. Marcus was listed as an official witness. His attorney, Valerie Min, was granted access to high-security zones and assigned an independent legal protection team from the Department of Justice. "I don't think they invited him to listen," she said in a brief interview with PBS. "I think they're trying to stop him from saying what they can't control." Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, the hearing became the main topic in all closed-door meetings. One anonymous senator disclosed, "The moment the media starts using the word network, silence is no longer an option. They need a move, not to protect justice, but to protect themselves." Marcus, once seen as a victim in an isolated incident, was now the focal point of an institutional reckoning. But, unlike before, he didn't just have a voice. He had encryption, he had recordings, he had statistics, he had files, and more importantly, he had millions watching him, waiting to see whether justice still meant anything when it confronted the very system that claimed to uphold it. Marcus was summoned before the House Subcommittee on Armed Forces Oversight. The hearing took place behind closed doors, under interagency intelligence supervision. Valerie Min, acting as lead counsel, requested a full audio recording of the session and insisted on the presence of an independent DOJ representative. Marcus sat opposite a long row of lawmakers who remained silent, Still as stone, the congressional clerk began. Mr. Jackson, we ask you to provide direct evidence linking individuals in the Blue Line _ network file to misconduct. Without blinking, Marcus responded, I don't have hypotheses. I have data. Without further words, Marcus opened his laptop. He inserted the USB into the secure port provided and entered a triple authentication code. On the screen appeared an audio clip, an officer speaking in an internal meeting. He's one of Boone's? Jackson, we're not letting him off easy. The voice was clear, authenticated by the military's AI voice analysis system. Inside the hearing room, no one spoke, no pens tapped, not a single cough. All eyes were fixed on the screen, where truth spoke in a human voice. But that silence didn't last. A subcommittee member, known to have ties to military personnel boards, leaned back in his chair and slowly asked, Mr. Jackson, if this file is an unofficial copy, who can verify its contents haven't been altered? The question was gentle in tone, but heavy with implication. Valerie moved to object, but Marcus raised a hand to stop her. He stared straight at the lawmaker. I can verify the file's origin. But if the aim of this hearing is to assess me, instead of investigating the network, then I fear we're questioning the wrong party. Immediately after the first session, major outlets reported in familiar fashion, neutral, technical, inconclusive. Marcus Jackson provides documents. Defense promises to verify. There were no mentions of secret societies, internal protection, or cover-ups. No headline clearly named those listed in the file. Meanwhile, on independent platforms, YouTube, Substack, and podcasts, a different story emerged. The government knew. They knew from the beginning. But only when the public was outraged did they pretend to care. Marcus returned to the military hospital after the hearing, offering no comment to reporters. He walked slowly, his shoulders still bandaged, eyes sharp. Valerie walked beside him, silent. But in their eyes, one thing was clear. They knew this fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The terrifying part wasn't that the system had betrayed them, it was that the system knew it had been exposed and still stood firm, as if nothing had happened. On Twitter, one user posted, We live in an age where truth only matters if it serves procedure. Below was a screenshot of Marcus's testimony, his face framed by the congressional seal. Caption, He's not a whistleblower, he's a survivor. And amid the outrage, the doubt, and the flickering belief, one question still hovered. This time, will anyone be brave enough to truly listen? On Wednesday morning, a special announcement from the Pentagon sent shockwaves through both the political system and legal circles. The case of Officer Jack Hurley will be temporarily transferred to the Federal Military Judicial Council under Article 134, Operation Honor Guard. The notice was just 2 short paragraphs, but its impact spread like a political minefield. This marked the first time in modern history that a civilian police officer would be tried by a military court, not for offenses against fellow soldiers, but for attacking an active duty serviceman engaged in a mission related to national security. When the Secretary of Defense appeared live on national television declaring, No one, regardless of their badge, has the right to point a gun at national honor and expect no consequences. The incident involving Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Jackson is no longer a mere law enforcement dispute. It is a grave challenge to public order, and the military will not stay silent when one of our own is betrayed on U.S. soil. He emphasized the word betrayed, not accidental, overzealous, or procedural error. The statement immediately ignited fierce backlash from constitutional scholars and legal experts. Supporters argued that Hurley didn't just attack a man, he attacked a symbol carrying the entire hierarchy and honor of the U.S. military. In legal commentary on The Atlantic, a former JAG lawyer remarked, Article 134 has been used to prosecute American soldiers overseas. Using it on a domestic police officer signals that this incident has far surpassed the reach of the civilian justice system. Opponents, however, pushed back. Civil rights activists, constitutional attorneys, and legal institutes warned that the move set a dangerous precedent. If the military can prosecute civilians, even under the guise of defending honor, How long before the boundary between civilian justice and armed authority disappears? A group of Harvard legal scholars issued an open letter to Congress stating, using military courts to sidestep structural questions is evasion, not justice. States like California and New York issued separate statements, affirming they would not recognize military verdicts imposed on civilian personnel working within their jurisdictions unless backed by a special federal order. Meanwhile, several southern states endorsed the Pentagon's move, calling it a step toward restoring respect for military dignity. The case was no longer just a trial. It became a standoff between two visions of justice, one that protects symbols and one that protects structure. Caught in the middle, Marcus offered no public comment. But in a private message to his lawyer, he wrote simply, "I don't care where Hurley is tried. I only care who has the guts to look at the list I submitted and admit he didn't shoot me alone. He pulled the trigger on behalf of a system that allowed him to exist." The special court was set at the Fort Myer Military Administration Complex, under tight protection by military police and the Joint Security Task Force. 3 judges were selected: a colonel who had once led legal ops in Iraq, a former NATO operational law expert, and a retired lieutenant general now serving as an ethics advisor to the Department of Defense. This was no ordinary panel. This was a symbol and a warning. Media access was restricted. No cameras, no live broadcasts. Every time the press requested trial transcripts, the same answer came: not yet declassified. On social media, people called it America's silent trial. Valerie Menn, Marcus's attorney, stated, "I don't care if Hurley is tried in a military or civilian court. I want to know, why was a known risk officer still armed, still assigned duty, and why did the system ignore that truth? If no one answers, then trying him is just killing a shadow." Inside the chamber, Hurley was represented by a court-appointed military legal team. He remained silent for most of the opening session. Only when asked, "Did you know the man you shot was a lieutenant colonel in the Army?" did he reply, "I didn't care who he was. I just acted on instinct." The response was shocking, but the judge only nodded slightly. Instinct, a word deadlier than any gun. When it came time to submit evidence, Marcus's USB was produced, along with a string of email analyses, internal audio recordings, and the blue line underscore network map. No one in court questioned its authenticity. No one refuted it, but no one voiced aloud the truth it carried either. Something hung heavy in the air, like staring at a crumbling wall while pretending it was still standing. Outside, the press split into 2 camps. One hailed Marcus as a hero, a symbol that must be protected. The other claimed, "He's disrupting faith in institutions." But Marcus remained silent. He knew that this time, words held less power than silence. A silence forcing others to face the names they signed, the files they ignored, and the bullets they didn't fire, but silently condoned. Then, on the final day of the preliminary hearing, a single handwritten question was passed down from the judge's bench to Marcus's lawyer. If you had to choose justice for yourself or the chance to expose everything, what would it be? Valerie didn't answer immediately. She handed the paper to Marcus. He looked at it, then signed the corner. Wrote nothing else, just a signature. But to those who understood, it was a declaration. I choose the truth, even if no one is left standing when it comes out. The landline phone in the living room rang 3 short times, in the middle of a moonless night. Eliza, Marcus's wife, woke up on the sofa, her head tilted toward the muted TV screen. The house was dark, with only the blinking green digits on the microwave clock flashing 2:37 a.m. She rarely answered the landline. Ever since Marcus was hospitalized, all communication had been through cell phones or email. But this time, something instinctive told her to pick up. Without checking the caller ID, she brought the receiver to her ear, the other hand gripping the blanket. The voice on the line, dry and hoarse, delivered a single sentence. "Don't let him testify a second time, or your daughter will be next." Then silence. No click, no name, no repeated threats. Just a voice. chillingly clear. Eliza stood frozen, her hand clutching the sleeve of her nightgown. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She simply took out her phone and typed a single message. "They know," sent to Marcus. The message was marked, "Read." Exactly 3 minutes later, no other words were needed. She sat back on the couch, phone in hand, eyes wide open, staring into the darkness. Outside the window, the tree in the yard swayed gently, casting distorted shadows across the glass, like a wordless warning. Their daughter, Mariah, was a sophomore at Georgetown University, less than a 20-minute drive from D.C. The family had always followed one principle: never involve the children in politics, never mix family with military duty. Marcus had often said, "I fight so girls like her can grow up in peace." But now, someone had decided she wouldn't be left out. They didn't need to touch her. Just the suggestion was enough to shake the entire system. Eliza didn't sleep again that night. She sat until morning, eyes unblinking, phone resting on her lap. She scanned her old contact list, looking for people who had worked with Marcus, people who once warned them that the past always comes back. But she stopped, because deep down she knew no one could protect her daughter but themselves. And sometimes that truth is the most terrifying of all. When Marcus called back, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I know," Eliza replied. "I don't need you to do anything else. I just need you not to back down." Marcus paused for a few seconds, then said, "I've lived long enough to know that if I turn back now, I'll carry that weight for the rest of my life, and still fail to protect anyone." They didn't talk long. No tears, just two people who had been through many wars, now learning to navigate one without a map. That morning, Eliza drove straight to Mariah's campus and waited outside for her daughter to finish class. She didn't give details. She didn't cry or warn her with fear. She just hugged her tightly and said, "From now on, don't go anywhere alone. And if anything happens, call me before you call the police." Mariah didn't ask why. She looked at her mother, then off into the distance toward Capitol Hill, where every decision was made through deals the public never got to witness. When Eliza returned home, the landline was unplugged from the wall, but the sound of that phone still rang in her mind, not as a noise, but as a steady pulse burned into memory. And in a world of investigations, dossiers, power plays, and political machinery, one simple truth stood out to Eliza more clearly than anything else. When they can no longer control the truth, they control the people who dared to speak it. Marcus didn't sleep again after Eliza's message. He sat in his hospital room, the light from the heart monitor casting flickers on his face. 30 years in the military had hardened him against fear, but threats against family had always felt like a red line no one would dare cross. Now they had crossed it. The next morning, Eliza entered the hospital room. She didn't cry. She didn't need to explain. She simply looked at him, placed a hand gently on his bandaged shoulder, and said, "If you back down, they win. But if you move forward, she might be the one who pays the price." The question didn't need answering, but it demanded a choice, the hardest one any father who has survived war could face: protect the country or protect your blood. Marcus called Mariah that afternoon. The call lasted just 4 minutes. He didn't mention the threat. He didn't hint at danger. He simply asked, "Do you believe I'm doing this for the right reason?" Mariah answered without hesitation, "Because you believe there are things no one else should be asked to do in your place." Marcus smiled softly. No trembling voice, no fatherly advice, just one last line: "Live as if we've already made it through this." That evening, Eliza placed a family photo on the table beside Marcus's hospital bed. They were in casual clothes, smiling under the trees at a campsite last summer. Marcus held it in his hand and stared at it for a long time. Then he told Valerie, "For the second hearing, I want it live streamed. No edits, no cuts, no pulled back cameras." Valerie looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "If they attack with darkness, we answer with light." That same night, an unmarked envelope was slipped through the hospital door. Inside was a photocopy of the front page of a sleazy tabloid: "Marcus Jackson, hero or spy," scrawled in red ink along the margin. "Your career might survive. Your daughter might not." No fingerprints, no camera footage of who delivered it. For the first time since this ordeal began, Valerie ordered 24/7 surveillance equipment installed in Marcus's room. He didn't object, but he didn't allow the family photo to be moved. It stayed there, anchored like a quiet reminder. No matter what happens, the reason he stood up has never changed. 2 days before the second hearing, Marcus left the hospital at night without notifying anyone. He wasn't in uniform, he carried no weapon, he wore only a faded gray jacket, the kind sold at surplus military stores, and dark sunglasses despite the darkness. He looked like an ordinary veteran, quietly blending into the very city he once swore to protect, but now wasn't sure how much longer he could still believe in it. Valerie didn't stop him. Eliza didn't ask. They both understood. Some things, when they must be done, are done without witnesses. Marcus walked 3 blocks and stopped at an underground parking lot behind the Radford Hotel, where Hurley was temporarily housed while awaiting trial. It was a special surveillance zone, staffed by anonymous federal guards, infrared cameras, and exit routes numbered but unmarked. Marcus didn't ask for permission. He simply waited. Leaning against a concrete pillar near the elevator, the flickering fluorescent light above cast erratic shadows, while the ventilation fans hissed like restrained breath. When the elevator dinged open with a sharp metallic ping, Jack Hurley stepped out, wearing a baseball cap, a hoodie, and holding a paper bag, like he had just picked up late-night food. He took 1 step, then stopped, his eyes immediately locking onto a familiar figure in the corner. No flinch, no defensive stance, just a sigh, followed by a crooked smirk. "I knew you'd show." His voice was calm, like greeting an old friend coming to settle a long-overdue score. Marcus didn't respond. He stood upright, removed his sunglasses, and let his gaze meet the face of the man who once pulled the trigger. It wasn't the gaze of an officer, nor a victim, just the eyes of someone who had seen too much, trying to judge whether the man in front of him had anything human left. They stood exactly 2 steps apart, far enough to avoid being picked up by distant mics, close enough to read the twitch of each other's faces. The drone of garage felt stripped of oxygen. After a moment, Hurley asked, "So what are you here for? To yell? Punch me, like in the movies?" Marcus shook his head, voice low, like a monologue. "I came to ask why." Hurley gave a dry chuckle. "Wrong direction. You should be asking why you thought you could survive poking something everyone else learned to ignore." Marcus didn't look away. He didn't tremble. "You might call it instinct. I call it shame." Hurley chuckled again, raising the bag slightly as if to offer a dinner. "Shame? Don't tell me you think this was about race. You were shot because you thought you were above our rules. You thought wearing that uniform made you untouchable. Did you exempt? Did it make you immune to lowering your head? I've met plenty like you, the kind who think honor makes you bulletproof." A long silence. Then Marcus said softly, "Not honor. I just believed that in the military, at least, rules meant something." Hurley shrugged, eyes narrowing. "Wrong again. Rules are written by those with more allies. And the sad truth is, no matter how many medals you wear, this system never called you one of its own." Marcus nodded gently. No rebuttal, no reaction. He turned and walked away, leaving behind a question without an answer, and a truth that didn't need to be spoken. Some battles aren't meant to be won, only to be fought, without bowing to defeat. He had taken 3 steps when Hurley's voice called out, not loud, but just enough to make him stop. "You wonder who's backing me?" Hurley's tone was no longer mocking. It turned cold, brutally honest. "No one. I don't need anyone. This system is my partner." Marcus stood still, not turning, as if weighing whether it was worth hearing more. But Hurley stepped closer, voice flat like reciting a debriefing. "I don't need protection. I just had to follow what plenty did before me and got pats on the back for being decisive. You know why I don't regret it? Because I followed the standards, the very ones set by men in uniform like you." Marcus turned back, not with anger, but a calm that carried danger. "I never taught anyone to pull the trigger on an unarmed man. I never accepted someone saying, 'I don't care who you are,' before shooting a soldier returning home." Hurley let out a soft laugh. "You're right. You didn't teach that. But you taught something worse." Silence. Marcus froze. Hurley tilted his head, eyes like a lecture explaining, "The way you all ignored the racial bias reports, the way black men got tougher psych evals, stricter background checks. The way every report on excessive force was always lacking sufficient evidence. That's how the system decides who survives and who disappears. He paused, then added slowly, I'm just the final product, the result the system spits out once it no longer needs to hide. Marcus didn't deny it. Hurley's last line wasn't boasting. It was the diagnosis. As Marcus walked away for the final time, Hurley called out behind him, You think you're fighting me, but really, you're fighting the thing you once served. Marcus didn't look back, but inside, that line didn't fade, because he knew it wasn't just a parting shot, it was the truth. A system doesn't need to order someone to pull the trigger. It just needs to create enough justification that no one questions it when the trigger is pulled. While preparing materials for the second hearing, Valerie handed Marcus an additional folder, compiled by a former military technical analyst who had once helped him recover data from the USB. This man, a retired engineer who had headed a strategic psychological analysis center, chose to remain anonymous for data safety reasons. In a subfolder named Archive_Ver1, there was an untitled Word document with a single opening line, Jasper Lee, Bravo 10, 2018. Marcus froze, his finger hovering over the screen. That name wasn't new. It was a scar. Lieutenant Jasper Lee, the man who had sat beside him for 3 months during the interagency audit between military and civilian law enforcement in North Carolina. Always spotless in uniform, silver-rimmed glasses, soft-spoken but meticulous with data, precise, complete, and never avoiding the uncomfortable parts. He once said, If you don't record it, that truth doesn't exist. Marcus remembered it well. Jasper spoke the truth like drafting a will. He had once sent Marcus a single email, 3 unencrypted lines. I kept a copy in case the system erases it. If I disappear, it's on Drive S5. Subfolder, remember my name. The file Valerie handed over also included a scanned report. Code incomplete, but the content clear. Personal Vehicle Incident Report, Jasper Lee, 203A1, Highway 164, unlit stretch. No witnesses, autopsy not requested. Conclusion, driver error. Note, no next of kin claimed the body. No funeral held. Marcus reread the phrase, no next of kin claimed the body. Jasper had been an orphan, raised by the military as his only family, who had signed off on closing the file, of a man who had no one but the Army. In the military record under pension, only one line appeared, suspended indefinitely, not dishonorably discharged, not declared KIA, no disciplinary action, just an extended blank space, as if someone who had once existed had been deleted from the system with a single click. Marcus had searched for him before, but back then there was no proof, no context. He thought himself paranoid, convinced the system couldn't be that silent. But now, the puzzle pieces formed a picture. Jasper had kept a backup, and Jasper's name vanished from every assignment list after 2019. For the first time in years, Marcus felt a chill. Not for himself, but for something he had once thought existed only in war thrillers. Systematic erasure. Jasper didn't disappear by accident. He was removed from the organizational map, not to hide him but to warn people like Marcus. But the warning didn't come in anonymous messages or threats. It came through silence, the most effective language of power. Marcus closed the folder, leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on a screen now dark. Jasper's name blinked in his mind like a source code left unresolved. They'd cleared the scene, erased the name, and hid the photo. But they couldn't erase memory. And for the first time, Marcus understood why he couldn't give up. Because if he didn't name Jasper, no one else would. That night, Marcus sat alone in his hospital room, the lamplight casting long shadows across the lines on his face, deepened by memory. In his hand was an old photograph, the only one remaining from a special 2018 training session in Georgia. 4 soldiers, faces that once believed justice and truth were 2 lanes of the same road. In the center was Jasper Lee, holding a mock-up board, an unlit cigar in his mouth, squinting like he dared the world to challenge him. Every time Marcus saw it, he remembered Jasper's words, "You don't need to shout, you just need not bow." Marcus had never been weak, but that night he sighed as if, for the first time, He allowed himself to feel tired. He leaned back, still clutching the photo, and wondered, if Jasper were still alive, would he be the one standing now? Would Jasper be the one taking all the questions, all the reports, all the bullets? Or would both of them have long disappeared, deleted like lines of code removed, with one administrative decision and no accountability? Jasper once said, "They don't have to push you out, they just need everyone else to forget you ever existed." New kind of fear emerged. Not fear of dying, but fear that no one would know he had lived, that no one would remember Jasper had lived, a man who had helped build interagency coordination protocols, co-authored civilian military legal frameworks, who had saved 3 soldiers in an explosion and now had no obituaries, no flags folded, no ceremonial farewells, just silence, like a storm without sound. Marcus dug through old emails, searching for Jasper's past messages. Most were dry data analyses and logical structures, but buried in one routine email, Jasper had written a personal line. "If one day I disappear, don't waste time looking for a body. Look for who got promoted because of the space I left behind." Marcus read that line over and over, his heart heavy. No one was shot, but people still die, in ways so quiet and clean, it's terrible. When Valerie returned to the room and saw Marcus sitting motionless, she placed a new file on the table and watched him in silence. "Are you all right?" Her voice was as soft as paper. Marcus looked up, eyes resting on her for a long time, filled with questions that didn't need answers. Then he spoke, almost as a confession. "I used to think my greatest fear was being killed, but it's not. What I fear most is being forgotten." He picked up the photo and slid it between the stack of files he'd bring to the hearing. "I'll testify, but this time I'm not speaking just for myself. I will name Jasper. So no matter who tries to erase him, someone will remember." Valerie said nothing. She simply nodded, then turned away, giving him a final moment of privacy before the names that had been deleted were spoken again, before all of America. At the Pentagon, in Conference Room 2 of the West Wing, a closed-door meeting of top generals was held without press presence or any official statement. The room was temporarily sealed under Level 4 security clearance, with opaque windows and no recording devices allowed. On the table were 2 hefty files. One contained the internal findings on the Hurley case, including audio recordings, investigative reports, and all data from Marcus's USB. The other held a brief, concise 3-page media strategy titled, with a single message, "Preserve Honor, Prevent Chaos." General Malcolm Rayner, Deputy Commander of Operations, was the first to speak. He stood without notes, both hands on the steel table, eyes sweeping the room. "The military cannot be dragged into political crossfire. If we allow extended prosecution, every individual linked to Jackson's reports will become a media target. And if that happens, the entire credibility structure collapses. From promotion boards to review systems, even our rapid response and internal checks will be pulled into a chain of doubt. We cannot commit institutional suicide." Opposite him, Lieutenant General Erica Shaw, commander of the Joint Response Oversight Brigade, disagreed. She didn't raise her voice, but every word was sharp as a blade. "Precisely because trust is cracking, we must prove no one is above scrutiny, not even our own. If Hurley had accomplices, if collusion occurred, then silence is complicity. This isn't about letting Marcus Jackson win. It's about keeping this system worthy of belief." Another general, once a NATO legal advisor, nodded quietly. He said nothing, but his eyes showed agreement. He had seen systems collapse from within, not due to enemies, but due to denial of responsibility. The air in the room was heavy. No one shouted. They exchanged looks, measured responses. In the military, disagreements are politely termed strategic differences. But everyone understood this wasn't a difference. It was a dividing line, and that line was splitting a command once trained to act as one body. Younger generals remained silent. They had seen the U.S. They knew that if revealed, dozens would lose their positions. And worse, the public's faith in the command structure would evaporate. The only one to close the meeting was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Alphonse Behrens. He gave no orders. He simply said before rising from his seat, "What we're protecting isn't just a face. It's the survival map of an entire system. If it cracks, we can't patch it with honor. We can only patch it with truth, but truth must be chosen, its timing, and its consequences. That same day, an internal memorandum leaked onto social media, tagged with the hashtag 2 commands, 1 army. The memo, still marked confidential draft in red, exposed deep rifts within the military. One faction proposed ending the matter with internal disciplinary action against Hurley and a symbolic statement to stabilize public sentiment. The other pushed for full publication of all officers accused in connection with the Blue Line network, to restore public trust before it vanishes for good. Veterans began speaking out. On private forums and military retiree sites, comments appeared at an unprecedented rate. One former Afghanistan serviceman wrote, "I served because I believed the Army didn't protect the corrupt. If we stay silent now, we're no better than local police." Another was more blunt. "Honor isn't about keeping secrets. It's about correcting wrongs when needed, and not fearing to expose enemies even if they wear the same uniform." But not all voices agreed. A group of former military strategy advisors who had worked at Homeland Security spoke at an online forum. "Blowing this up will politicize the military. What happens when generals become campaign talking points? We're not trained to set moral examples. We're trained to maintain stability." Conservative outlets quickly picked up the viewpoint, running headlines like, "Don't let one officer drag the Army into a political quagmire," or "No one is a saint, silence is national duty." Marcus knew the institution was splintering. Valerie walked into his hospital room, handed him a printout of the leaked memo. He didn't ask where she got it. She simply said, "They're not unified, but no one wants to be the one pulling the second trigger. This time, on their own system." Marcus nodded, eyes fixed on a screen displaying the real-time schedule of upcoming hearings. Every name, every note, and the quiet gray of those no longer in the rank. That night, Marcus sat quietly before the board in his room, where he had written down each forgotten name: Jasper, Boone, Cantu. Beneath each was a year, a place, and a question mark. How did they vanish, and why did no one ever ask? He knew when a military command divides, no one wins, because there can be no victory when people cling to appearance and forget the soul. If no one speaks the truth, the first casualty is memory, and eventually the faith of an entire nation. At 5:45 a.m. Eastern Time, while most of America was still asleep, a special news bulletin from the independent satellite broadcaster LibertyCast Channel 3 aired nationwide, not via cable television, but through encrypted satellite signals and international live stream platforms. No prior trailers, no scheduled slots, just a file simultaneously appearing on civilian satellite devices, with a stark warning. Material obtained by investigative reporters, not subject to any censorship system. Judge for yourself. The headline appeared simply on a black background with cold white lettering powerful enough to awaken the entire system. Exclusive. Hurley's unreleased body cam footage from the shooting of Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Jackson. No music, no opening effects, just a recording icon and exactly 1 minute and 12 seconds of footage. Those 72 seconds would halt the entire mainstream media control structure. The video opened with footage from Hurley's chest mount camera, slightly shaky, accompanied by the sound of boots hitting concrete. The camera clearly showed an SUV parked on the roadside, window partially open. Marcus was inside, calmly holding his military ID out the window, making no sudden movements. No provocation, no resistance, just clear audio capturing every breath and step. Then Hurley's voice erupted, raw and nearly growling directly into the lens. "I don't care who you are. Your skin color is enough." At that instant, all prejudices and defenses of standard procedure collapsed. The sound of a safety mechanism disengaging followed immediately, then a tense breath, and finally, a gunshot. The camera jolted sharply. Marcus's voice came through clearly, steady and calm. "I'm a soldier. I'm unarmed." The sound shattered more than silence. It destroyed trust in all previous justifications. No one could deny what they saw because it was raw, unedited, and required no explanation. It was the truth, previously denied any chance to surface. What terrified viewers wasn't just the video itself, but the realization that it had existed all along, yet no mainstream media or law enforcement had ever released it. The video hadn't vanished. It had simply been hidden. After countless hearings and orchestrated concealment, a single minute of footage from a satellite transmission overturned the entire game board. On social media, the video spread at unprecedented speed. Viewers needed no context. They heard the first sentence and immediately understood. The suspicions they'd held were now confirmed vividly in both image and sound. Within just 15 minutes after airing, Hurley's body cam footage was shared over 400,000 times, not through mainstream channels or expert guidance, but simply via direct links, quotes, friend tags, and private messages, overwhelming social media like an unstoppable flood. Hashtags I can't unhear it and Hurley Body Camp reached top positions on Twitter and Reddit within the hour. From student groups to veteran communities, independent podcasts to international forums, the footage became essential viewing. Without it, one couldn't grasp why America woke up demanding justice. CNN became the first mainstream channel compelled to rebroadcast the footage, quickly followed by MSNBC and Fox News. Each reacted defensively, quoting a Department of Justice spokesperson. "We are verifying the authenticity and originality of the data." Yet verification no longer mattered. Everyone had already watched. They heard Hurley's words firsthand, directly from his body cam. A court trial was unnecessary. The public's judgment had already been made in millions of silent observations. Television now played merely a redundant role, a delayed reflex after truth had emerged. For the first time, the public hadn't waited for the system to deliver justice. They'd witnessed it themselves, and what they saw could no longer be labeled mere suspicion. It was vivid, painful, and unforgettable for anyone who watched. Marcus had yet to comment, remaining quietly in his hospital room, observing silently without summoning lawyers or issuing statements. Valerie, his sole media representative, spoke for him sufficiently, posting a single line without hashtags or links. What they tried to keep hidden wasn't because it was wrong, but because it was far too clearly right. This sentence was shared over 1 million times within 6 hours, printed on shirts, displayed on protest signs, and placed prominently outside government buildings. It became the opening statement on CBS's national morning broadcast at 8:05 a.m., the first major news report after the leak. The anchor stared directly into the camera without analysis or commentary, asking simply, "If this is what they've hidden, how much more haven't we seen?" No one answered. Everyone knew the question wasn't intended to receive a response. It was meant to echo in the mind of every citizen, every moment they saw a uniform, a symbol of justice, or a building where power still concealed something that should have belonged to the public all along. The military trial opened in a modern courtroom at Fort Meade, Maryland, where the most significant cases of the United States military are adjudicated. It was more than just a legal event. It symbolized a societal moment, drawing intense coverage from international media. Journalists from major news networks such as CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera were present, their camera lenses trained on the witness table reserved for the central figure, Marcus Jackson. Marcus entered the courtroom wearing the distinctive green uniform of the U.S. Army, adorned with gleaming ribbons of valor and insignia marking his rank as lieutenant colonel. His face showed no anger or resentment, only a sharp, deep gaze, the gaze of a soldier who had survived many battles, now confronting the greatest one yet, the fight for truth and justice. Each step he took echoed on the polished wooden floor, carrying the weight of a lifetime marked by sacrifice and resilience. When called to the witness stand, Marcus showed no emotion. He stood tall, lightly resting his hand on a notebook. His voice resonated clearly and steadily, neither hurried nor hesitant. He began recounting the details of the incident, without dramatizing or making excuses. Simply the truth, told calmly and sincerely. Marcus described the fateful afternoon when he was driving home in his black SUV, was stopped by the police without clear reason, and faced insulting and hostile words from Officer Hurley. He did not exaggerate or emphasize aggression. He recounted that when he showed his military ID and tried to explain himself, the only response he received was a gun pointed directly at him and a gunshot ringing through the quiet air of the affluent neighborhood. He described the pain when the bullet grazed his shoulder, yet he did not scream or react violently. He remained calm, holding on to the discipline drilled into him through years of military service. He labeled no one an enemy, made no accusations. He simply laid out the facts. The evidence recorded on video, confirmed by witnesses, and verified by objective proof. What stunned everyone most was the profound silence in Marcus's testimony. He did not succumb to anger or hatred. Instead, he posed a haunting, open-ended question for everyone present in the courtroom and those watching remotely. If I were no longer alive to stand here, would you believe my words, or would the truth continue to be buried? Those words marked not only the end of his testimony, but also a challenge, a difficult question directed not only at the judges and jury, but also resonating deeply in the hearts of citizens awaiting justice. Marcus, with humility and resilience, did not force belief upon anyone. He merely posed the question, leaving society to shoulder the responsibility of answering it. All eyes in the courtroom were fixed on him, including senior military generals and veteran legal personnel. Some nodded quietly in understanding, while others gazed thoughtfully, each pondering internally, how can truth overcome the web of power and silence? When Marcus stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom atmosphere remained dense, void of applause or noise. Only a reflective silence lingered, one profound in its significance. It was the moment Marcus transcended from being merely a victimized soldier to a symbol of the fight for truth, justice, and the belief that many had long lost. He stood there without hatred or resentment, only unwavering resolve, a small flame in the dark shadow cast by injustice and corruption. After Marcus concluded, the courtroom experienced a brief yet powerful silence. The prosecution lawyer, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes wearing a precisely pressed suit, rose from his wooden chair and approached Marcus slowly, holding a meticulously annotated thick file. He began his questioning calmly but provocatively. "Lieutenant Colonel Jackson, are you certain of your statements today? Could your memory have been influenced by stress, pain, or perhaps personal bias?" Marcus looked directly at the lawyer without blinking and replied clearly, "I have served nearly 20 years in the military, counselor. I've been trained to recall clearly everything that happens, whether on the battlefield or in civilian life. Bias is not among my skills." The lawyer pressed further, attempting to cast doubt. "Yet you admit hearing only one remark from Hurley amidst a rapid and chaotic situation. Are you certain you accurately recall the exact words you've testified to?" Marcus remained firm, unshaken by the subtly misleading question. "I am certain, because it wasn't just the words, it was the action that followed, the gun pointed at me, the bullet grazing my body, the way I was treated. Truth isn't just sound, it's how people treat one another." Changing tactics, the lawyer posed a different question. "Have you considered that, without your rank and uniform, perhaps this incident would not have garnered such attention?" Marcus paused briefly before responding gently but powerfully. "Precisely. But the point isn't that I was noticed due to my rank. The issue is this. If even an Army lieutenant colonel in uniform can be treated unjustly, what might ordinary people face? Who will speak for them?" His response triggered quiet murmurs and nods of agreement among spectators and reporters. Slightly unsettled, the lawyer quickly regained his composure. "But here, sir, we're examining a specific incident, not the entire system. Do you not think your testimony might be influenced by personal emotion?" Marcus held the lawyer's gaze firmly, his voice gaining strength without losing its composure. "Personal emotion is something every human has, but the truth isn't built on emotions. It rests on evidence, on camera footage everyone has seen, on testimony from other witnesses. I'm not seeking sympathy or anger from anyone. I simply demand justice according to the facts we all see." The lawyer asked no further questions and sat down, evidently recognizing that pressing Marcus further would yield no additional benefit. Marcus remained steadfast at the witness stand, confronting a powerful establishment ahead and standing symbolically for countless voiceless people behind him. Fully aware of this, he drew strength from it. The questioning session concluded in heavy silence. All eyes in the courtroom now reflected respect mixed with contemplation. This man, armed solely with truth, courage, and perseverance, had challenged a powerful system to defend those who could not speak up. As Marcus stepped down, each footstep echoed through the vast courtroom. Marcus neither won nor lost. He simply stood for the truth. After Marcus concluded his testimony and returned to his seat, all eyes in the courtroom turned toward Jack Hurley. Throughout the trial, until now, he had remained silent, head bowed, staring at his tightly clasped hands as though avoiding everyone's scrutiny. Tension had etched itself deeply into his features, yet he had maintained an unsettlingly cold and indifferent demeanor. Suddenly, the atmosphere filled with anticipation was shattered by Hurley's unexpected cry. It wasn't a soft sob meant to preserve dignity, but a loud, resounding wail echoing across the courtroom, as if he could no longer contain the emotions he had held inside for too long. Everyone froze in astonishment. The judge, jury, lawyers, and dozens of reporters turned toward him, their eyes wide with surprise and suspicion. Jack Hurley, known for his tough, arrogant demeanor and emotional restraint in public, was now weeping like a child. His shoulders shook uncontrollably, tears streaming down flushed cheeks. It took him several seconds before he could rise, his body unbalanced by intense emotion. Standing there, head bowed deeply, he slowly raised his gaze and looked directly at Marcus. His eyes no longer showed defiance or anger, only vulnerability, fear, and haunting pain. Hurley took a deep breath, voice trembling as he struggled to speak. "I was afraid, but not because of his skin color. It was his eyes." He paused briefly, seemingly battling to retrieve memories from his past. The courtroom fell into complete silence, no one daring to interrupt, as Hurley's weak, shaky voice filled the air again. "Those eyes were exactly like the officer who tormented me in training camp." As soon as Hurley finished his sentence, profound silence enveloped the courtroom. No one spoke or asked further questions. Everyone was taken aback by this emotional and unexpected revelation. Hurley was no longer talking solely about the current incident. He was uncovering a deep wound from his past, something previously unknown and unmentioned. Surprise and confusion briefly flickered across the faces of judges and jury members. They had expected unpredictable developments, but no one imagined the seemingly hardened man would break down and disclose something so unexpected. Several reporters hurriedly took notes, though even they hesitated, uncertain whether this was a pivotal revelation or simply the act of a desperate man trying to evade guilt. Hurley remained standing, tears still streaming, but said nothing more. His statement had completely upended the emotions and perceptions of everyone present. They had not only witnessed the stark reality of existing prejudices, but were also confronted with another troubling truth, that sometimes victims of injustice, when grown, can themselves become perpetrators of new injustices. Marcus, seated nearby, quietly observed Hurley, his face retaining its characteristic calmness. Yet, deep within his eyes, one could discern a profound contemplation. The trial was no longer merely about judging one individual. It had become a place where everyone had to confront the demons fostered by the system itself, a system that had unintentionally created countless other Jack Hurleys through its indifference, prejudice, and cruelty. After his unexpected emotional outburst, Jack Hurley remained standing. Gradually regaining composure, he wiped away tears, his voice returning to its usual hard-edged tone. The prosecution lawyer, initially perplexed by Hurley's sudden emotional shift, cautiously yet decisively asked for clarification. "Mr. Hurley, the lawyer began carefully. "Can you clarify your previous statement? What specifically about Lieutenant Colonel Gaxon's gaze triggered your memory?" Hurley quickly wiped his face as if rejecting the weakness he'd revealed. When he raised his head this time, his expression had transformed, becoming cold, defiant, and sharp as a blade. His voice was strong, without trembling, and filled with resentment. "I'm not excusing myself. I know I was wrong. I know it was my hand that pulled the trigger that day. But you," he paused briefly, scanning the courtroom and meeting every attentive gaze, "do you truly understand? This system, the very system you're protecting and upholding, created me, the trigger puller." His words plunged the courtroom into extreme tension. Attendees exchanged worried, bewildered glances. This wasn't just a self-defense. It was an indictment of the entire system, something few dared criticize openly in a judicial setting. Hurley continued, his voice growing increasingly firm, each word striking deeply into the consciousness of everyone listening. "Marcus Jackson's eyes reminded me of my years at military training camp. I wasn't the best soldier, but I tried. Yet what did the commanding officers do? Instead of teaching me how to be a soldier, they tortured, humiliated, and forced me into becoming someone who lived in constant fear and anger. I carried those scars and that rage my entire life. Marcus's eyes were the same eyes I saw countless times, the eyes of those who use discipline as a pretext to destroy human beings." Hurley paused, drew a deep breath, and then directly challenged the tribunal, his voice defiant and resolute. "Yes, I shot him. I cannot deny that fact. But will any of you admit that this system handed me the gun, filled me with fear, and created the circumstances of that day?" His words reverberated throughout the vast courtroom, each sentence heavy with anger, pain, and sharp accusation. "You can condemn me. I'm ready to accept any punishment. But remember my words clearly. Condemning me today won't change anything. Tomorrow, next week, or next year, there will still be other Jack Hurleys. Other people pushed to their limits, other bullets fired. For one reason alone, your system refuses to confront the truth." Following Hurley's statement, heavy silence again gripped the courtroom. His words were a direct challenge to everyone's conscience. The judge looked at him sternly, but with underlying concern. Jury members lowered their gazes, seemingly reluctant to confront the reality they'd just heard. Marcus, seated a short distance away, remained composed, though his eyes reflected unusual seriousness. Hurley's words didn't excuse his wrongful action, but they revealed another terrifying truth, exposing dark corners long hidden within America's military and judicial system. At that moment, everyone present seemed forced to face a reality far more painful than one individual's crime. Perhaps this courtroom was not just judging a soldier or policeman, but putting the entire system, and indeed the nation's, beliefs on trial. When the trial appeared to be nearing its end, with all testimonies and evidence seemingly complete, the prosecutor suddenly stood up and announced the summoning of a special new witness. No one in the courtroom knew exactly who this witness was, but the grave expression on the prosecutor's face indicated that this testimony could dramatically change the course of the case. Minutes later, the courtroom door slowly opened. A middle-aged man walked in, hesitant and visibly tense. It was Travis Bennett, a former police officer who had served in the same unit as Hurley for 3 years. Bennett approached the witness stand, eyes fixed to the ground, avoiding the inquisitive stares from all sides of the packed courtroom. The prosecutor gently asked Bennett to introduce himself and explain his presence. Bennett took a deep breath, his hand trembling slightly as he placed it on the Bible for the oath. When he began to speak, his voice was hoarse, each word seemingly carrying the weight and shame of a dark past. "I'm Travis Bennett, former patrol officer from Unit 7, the same unit as Jack Hurley for 3 years. I'm here today to testify about something I should have spoken about a long time ago." He paused, appearing to summon every ounce of strength from deep within himself to continue. The prosecutor asked patiently but firmly, "Mr. Bennett, please tell the court specifically what you intend to disclose." Bennett looked down, gripping the edge of the witness stand tightly, and slowly forced out each word with visible difficulty. "When I was a patrol officer, some colleagues and I played a game, a shameful betting game that fills me now with disgust and deep shame. A chilling silence descended over the courtroom, as if everyone was holding their breath for what was about to come next. Bennett continued, voice trembling yet resolute. "We bet on who would be the first to point their gun at a black person during patrol. Whoever did it first would win, and every time we played, Hurley was always the winner." The room erupted into shock. Judges, attorneys, jury members, and journalists exchanged stunned and angry looks. None had imagined that such a horrifying and shameful reality could exist within the police force, people tasked with upholding justice and protecting everyone's safety. The prosecutor looked at Bennett, eyes sharp, yet compassionate. He asked further, "Why did you choose to disclose this now, after the trial has been ongoing for days?" Bennett clenched his fists, face strained and pale. He tried to look up towards the jury, his eyes pained yet sincere. "Because I could no longer live with this guilt. I knew what I did was wrong and cruel, but the day I saw the video of Hurley pointing his gun at Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Jackson, I realized if I didn't speak out, I'd remain complicit forever." Bennett looked directly at Hurley, sitting not far from him. Hurley lowered his head, avoiding his former colleague's gaze. Bennett shook his head, voice pained yet decisive. "I'm not speaking out to save myself, but to save potential future victims. I speak because the truth can no longer remain hidden." The courtroom was tense to the point of suffocation. Bennett's words were like sharp blades, not only exposing Hurley but also laying bare a terrifying dark side of an entire system, a system once trusted by the public to uphold justice and safety. Those present were no longer merely witnessing a trial, they were witnessing a profound moral crisis within law enforcement at the heart of society. Immediately after Bennett revealed the twisted and shameful betting game he had participated in, the courtroom was engulfed by suffocating silence. People seemed to forget to breathe, struggling to absorb the dreadful truth they had just heard. The judge regarded Bennett, eyes stern, yet revealing a flicker of compassion and sorrow. Recognizing the critical importance of this testimony, the prosecutor approached Bennett cautiously, his voice calm yet firm. "Mr. Bennett, I must ask you, if what you just said is true, why did you wait until today, after several days of this trial, to speak out?" Standing at the witness stand, Bennett bowed his head deeply, bearing the weight of not just his past but his future. His hands trembled uncontrollably. When he looked up, his eyes were red, voice cracking as if about to shatter. "I was afraid," Bennett whispered, clearly enough to resonate in every corner of the courtroom. "I've lived in fear for many years, fear of being labeled a traitor, fear of being ostracized, fear of losing everything I'd built. I've seen many others who wanted to speak out but were silenced, shunned, even lost their careers." He paused briefly, inhaling deeply to regain strength. The courtroom remained utterly silent, no one daring to interrupt. "But," Bennett continued, his voice growing stronger, "when I saw the video of Marcus being shot, seeing him sitting there, still calm, still resilient after everything he'd endured, I couldn't keep pretending nothing happened. I knew if I kept silent, I would continue being part of the problem, rather than someone helping to fix it." He turned his gaze to Marcus, who sat nearby, face impassive, but eyes quietly understanding. Bennett sensed this support, enabling him to speak more clearly and boldly. "The truth is, during my time as a police officer, I witnessed countless acts of racism, disguised as protecting public safety or preventing danger. We all knew these terms were just excuses. That horrific betting game was just a small part of many wrongdoings that occurred daily in our unit. And the scariest part is I convinced myself silence was the only way to survive." Bennett looked around the courtroom, his expression filled with pain yet extraordinary courage. "But today, I want everyone to understand silence is no longer an option. Silence has turned too many innocent people into victims. Silence made me complicit. I can't bear seeing someone like Marcus Jackson, someone who dedicated his life to this country, become a target of injustice and prejudice. I don't want anyone else to endure such horror. His trembling voice gradually faded. No one could utter a single word. Bennett's testimony was no longer merely against an individual. It was a powerful accusation, a painful condemnation aimed squarely at the justice system and law enforcement itself. Nobody could pretend they hadn't heard or understood clearly what Bennett had just revealed. All eyes lingered on Bennett, a man standing alone yet brave, willing to bear any consequence to speak a truth deliberately ignored for too long. In that moment, silence lost its place, replaced by an undeniable reality. Prejudice and hatred had deeply infiltrated a system meant to protect justice and equality for everyone. After many tense days of trial filled with fierce legal debates and a multitude of evidence presented, the military court finally reached its conclusion. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with tension. Every gaze and breath felt stretched taut like a string. Everyone present, from the judge, jury, lawyers to reporters and relatives, waited in silence. The anticipation was palpable, as if each passing second stretched endlessly. The members of the jury rose and left the courtroom to deliberate, behind closed doors, for nearly an hour. Outside, the murmur of voices gradually faded, yielding to profound silence. The story of the case, of justice, and of lives caught in the spotlight of the nation and international media hung heavily in the air. When the jury returned, the courtroom fell completely silent again. The judge, a middle-aged man with a solemn face and piercing eyes, approached the bench. His voice was deep, solemn, and authoritative, carrying a powerful resonance to every listener. Jack Hurley, defendant in the case of armed assault against national military personnel, has been tried fairly, objectively, and thoroughly. After reviewing all files, testimonies, and physical evidence, the jury unanimously finds the defendant guilty of the most serious charges. He paused briefly, sweeping his gaze across Marcus Jackson and his family, before continuing. Therefore, the court sentences the defendant to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This is the maximum penalty prescribed by law for this offense, reflecting the strictness of the law and protecting the honor and safety of national military personnel. The verdict echoed through the courtroom, causing a momentary hush, as if the room had stopped breathing. Some stood and offered gentle applause, while many others simply exchanged looks filled with complex emotions, from joy and relief to deep emotion. Marcus rose abruptly, tears glistening in his eyes but maintaining rare composure. He turned to look at his wife and daughter nearby, noticing the silent tears streaming down their faces, tears of liberation and justice served. That moment was not only the end of a prolonged legal battle, but also a historic turning point, marking justice's voice against wrongdoing once thought to be concealed in darkness. Outside the courtroom, hurried footsteps, reporters' chatter, and a flood of questions from the public surged incessantly. The verdict not only eased those involved, but also sparked widespread public discourse. People debated the law's sternness, power, and responsibility, and a justice system committed to standing by truth. Previously, many doubted that a police officer could be harshly prosecuted, especially in a sensitive case involving racial discrimination and authority. But today, with an unyielding life sentence, the court sent a strong message. No one is above the law, and justice will always be enforced, regardless of social status. Marcus Jackson, as the victim, said little after the verdict. He gently told his wife, "Justice has been done. We did the right thing." She smiled, grasping his hand tightly, their exchange glance a promise of perseverance and faith in a brighter tomorrow. Though the trial concluded, the story of Marcus and Hurley remained a profound lesson on justice, truth, and social responsibility. The verdict not only closed a dark chapter, but opened opportunities to reflect, reform, and change the system from within. Immediately following the announcement of Hurley's life sentence without parole, the atmosphere outside the courtroom heated up like never before. Reporters, media staff, and large crowds gathered eagerly, awaiting developments from the Pentagon and related authorities. The Secretary of Defense, during a live emergency press conference, officially addressed the case and this historic decision. The sentencing of Officer Hurley under laws against armed assault on national military personnel exemplifies the law's strictness against all wrongdoing. It also serves as a strong warning that no one is allowed to stand above justice, regardless of rank or power. The Department of Defense simultaneously orders a comprehensive investigation into the list of officers and personnel Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Jackson identified in his report. This information quickly became the focal point across news outlets and social forums. The Pentagon's order to pursue all individuals named by Marcus marked a significant milestone in internal cleansing and sparked hope for thousands of soldiers and public officials enduring pressure and injustice within the system. International media unanimously covered the story, acknowledging it as a major step forward in fighting corruption, racial discrimination, and power protection within armed forces and security agencies. Human rights organizations voiced support for the decision, emphasizing it as an opportunity to cleanse the foundations of public authority and rebuild public trust. At the U.S. Congress, legislators from various factions held special sessions to reassess policies, recruitment procedures, and oversight of public forces. Calls for strong reforms resonated continuously, exerting great pressure on executive and judicial bodies. Meanwhile, Marcus Jackson became a symbol of resilience and righteousness. Numerous organizations invited him as a speaker at human rights and military reform conferences. His story inspired many fighting for justice and truth across America. However, change was not easy. Some individuals within the system, especially those previously named by Marcus, reacted fiercely. Covert schemes aimed at blocking publicity and handling of the case continued. The legal and political battle remained long and arduous. Nonetheless, with the historic verdict and resolute involvement from leadership levels, hope for a fairer future began to form, a future where truth is not distorted, justice is not obscured, and those responsible are no longer lenient with wrongdoing. This verdict did not merely end a single case, but opened a new chapter on the journey toward transparency, accountability, and respect for human rights within America's military and law enforcement system. Marcus stood in silence before the casket, which was solemnly placed in the military funeral home. The gentle light from the surrounding candles cast his figure in a pensive and solitary shadow. Under the watchful eyes of former comrades, family, and loved ones, a solemn atmosphere pervaded the room. But this was not the funeral of another person. It was a farewell ritual for an old part of Marcus himself, the soldier who had once endured, silently bearing pain and being pushed into the shadows of injustice. Throughout his years of service, Marcus had faced countless fierce battles on the field, but the deepest wounds did not come from enemy bullets. They were the slow internal injuries inflicted by invisible oppression and stereotypes he endured as a black soldier. That soldierly part of him had once endured, obeyed orders without complaint, and accepted silence as the only way to survive. Now, standing in the funeral parlor, Marcus felt the end of that chapter with striking clarity. Every breath, every gaze in the room seemed to remind him that the past no longer had a place in his life. His close comrades, those who had fought by his side, were also present, their eyes quietly sharing a sense of empathy and mourning for the part of Marcus that had been buried within himself. His family, his wife and daughter, stood close by, holding hands tightly, seemingly aware of the psychological weight borne by the man they loved. The air was filled with solemnity, but also deep emotion, pain, regret, and above all, hope for the future. Marcus thought about the days gone by, the times he stood in silence, witnessing injustice, but was unable to speak. The times he wondered if truth and justice would ever come for him and his fellow soldiers. He had been a soldier who knew only how to obey, forbidden to ask questions or speak the truth. But now, that part of him had been buried, along with hatred and injustice. Within Marcus, a fierce awakening burned, a determination never to end the fight for justice and truth. He knew change did not come from silence, but from courageous voices and relentless action, and he had chosen that path, to stand up, speak out, and fight, even if alone and facing countless challenges. No one in the funeral home spoke much. They simply bowed their heads, silently offering their final farewells to the old part of Marcus, the soldier who had once been suffocated by the system, but now was left behind. This funeral was not just an ending, but a beginning. A part had passed away, making room for a new Marcus, a man of courage, resolve, and someone who would never yield to injustice. The old soldier was laid to rest with honor, while the new warrior continued on a journey to pursue truth. Marcus turned to the window, his gaze stretching far into the dusk-lit sky. He reminded himself that life was not only about victories on the battlefield, but also about the silent struggles within the soul, battles only the brave could win. Within him, the fire of hope burned stronger than ever. Now he was no longer the silent soldier of the past. He was one who stood in the light of justice and truth, someone who would never stop fighting for the most sacred values. Marcus's discharge day was not marked by raucous ceremony or glowing praise. Instead, it was quiet, simple, but full of meaning. He wore his uniform one last time, holding his cap and medals neatly, symbols of nearly 2 decades. Yet deep in his eyes, a new determination and reclaimed freedom shone. His footsteps were light but firm as he walked the familiar hallway of the military headquarters. Each step affirmed to himself that life would no longer be a sequence of silence and endurance. Marcus was no longer a soldier bound to unconditional obedience, but a free man with a voice and actions that carried weight. As he reached the main gate of the base, where soldiers come and go each day, Marcus stopped. He lifted his head and looked straight ahead, where the sky opened wide, a symbol of the new horizon in his life. The sunset cast a golden glow, reflecting a sense of peace, but profound strength on his face. He thought to himself, honor doesn't reside in the badge. Honor is in what you do when no one is forcing you. That vow was not only for Marcus, but a message to all who have had to fight for justice and truth. It was a reminder that a person's worth is not defined by outward symbols, but by their actions and resolve in the hardest moments. For Marcus, leaving the military was not an end, but the start of a new journey, a journey of tireless struggle for greater value. He understood his work would never be easy, that more challenges awaited, but he was ready to face them. He lifted his head high, breathing in the cool, free air. Memories of the past, the pains and hardships, were now precious baggage for him to move forward even stronger. Marcus walked slowly but decisively, each step opening a new chapter in his life, a chapter of freedom, truth, and justice. He knew he was not alone, and that his voice would inspire many others. His figure gradually disappeared beyond the gate, but his story, his battle against injustice and prejudice, would echo on in the hearts of all who longed for a fairer society. A year had passed since the historic trial in which justice was uncompromisingly served for grave misconduct in the military and law enforcement. Marcus Jackson, once a lieutenant colonel, now no longer wore his green uniform adorned with gleaming ribbons. Instead, he appeared in simple civilian clothes, his hair streaked with white, and his gaze remained sharp, reflecting both the strength and gentleness of a man who had weathered many storms. Marcus's life had turned to a completely new chapter. Far different from his years under rigid military discipline, he became a symbol of resilience, courage, and truth. Refusing to stop at merely defending himself and his family, Marcus founded a nonprofit called Honor Line, a haven for those who suffered injustice, racial discrimination, or abuse of power in the military and police. Honor Line was more than just a complaint center. It became a beacon for transparency and fairness, a place where every marginalized voice was respected and protected. The organization united veterans, lawyers, activists, and others who shared Marcus's experiences, creating a supportive community that offered legal counsel, psychological support, and advocated for reform in the military and law enforcement. In a small classroom where Honor Line regularly held workshops, Marcus now stood before groups of young learners, not just recently discharged soldiers, but security staff, police officers, and activists. He was no longer the rigid commander of old, but an inspiring teacher, sharing lessons of ethical battle, not with weapons, but with courage and steadfastness against injustice. He taught that honor is not a badge on the chest, but what we do when no one is forcing us. With a warm smile and a gaze full of experience, Marcus filled each lesson with hope and seriousness. The students learned not only self-protection, but were encouraged to become leaders in transforming their environment for fairness and equality. Marcus shared his own stories and challenges, showing that true strength also comes from sincerity and the courage to face one's weaknesses. HonorLine continued expanding, hosting community events, public discussions, and media campaigns to raise awareness of racism, abuse of power, and human rights in military and police contexts. Marcus and his colleagues became pioneers, inspiring many young people to stand up for justice and fairness. Every day, as Marcus left his classroom, he knew he was making a meaningful difference. He was no longer just a soldier obeying orders, but a teacher guiding a new generation brave enough to change the world. A year after those events, a photograph of Marcus teaching was hung in the Pentagon's main hall, the heart of American military power. The image, showing Marcus in plain clothes with a determined, deep gaze, symbolized not just the transformation from a battlefield warrior to a defender of justice, but a commitment to sacred human values. Beneath it was an inscription: "Not everyone who wears a uniform is worthy, and not everyone who is shot must remain silent." These words were a warning and a call for honor and truth, reminding all who entered that justice is defined by courageous action, not appearances. Marcus's legacy did not end with the trial verdict. It became faith and hope for a new generation of soldiers. Youth no longer pressured into silence, but empowered to fight for what is right. HonorLine's growth turned it into a lasting symbol of change and oversight in the military and society. Through his journey, Marcus transformed his personal ordeal into a living torch for all who search for justice and freedom, ensuring that the voice of the marginalized would never again be ignored. Have you ever been misunderstood and unfairly judged simply because someone didn't truly know you? Have you ever been underestimated, yet quietly proved yourself to be better than anyone expected? If this story has awakened something within you, please share it so that many others can learn and grow. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss inspiring stories that help you stay strong on your own journey. Let's spread the power of truth and perseverance together. Thank you for taking the time to follow my channel. Your support and interest are powerful motivations that drive me to continue producing meaningful, high-quality content. In the days ahead, I'll bring you even more compelling stories and sharper perspectives, not just to entertain, but to speak to truths that deserve to be heard. Please keep watching, sharing, and spreading the message, because this journey always has room for those who believe in truth and human worth. Thank you so much.